next speaker, Cornelia Müller, a professor of applied linguistics affiliated with the Viadrina University in Frankfurt, Oder. She has worked on gesture, including co-speech gesture, metaphor in gesture, also conventionalization of gesture. She has also worked on multimodal forms of communication, film and audiovisual media. She was one of the founding editors of Gesture Journal, published since, I think, 2001. She has also co-edited the Gesture Studies monograph series together with Adam Kendon. She has, in fact, edited and co-edited a number of important books. One of them is Body Language Communication, an international handbook on multimodality in human language, which, as I was told, is also known as the Orange Book, especially among students. Her name is certainly familiar to the members of our lab in Torun. She is among the most frequent citations that we use. So we are very excited you are joining us today, Cornelia. The floor, or actually the screen, and the speakers are yours.
Thank you so much for this kind introduction, and I'm really sorry that I missed the talk, the day yesterday. Already the talk this morning was so interesting and fascinating. So really sorry for that. And yeah, thank you for your invitation. And I wanted to ask you whether I should turn off my video. Maybe yes or no. Yes. And so I turn off my video, right? So you don't see my face, you just see the screen, right? Okay, good, okay. No, it's fine, it's fine. So, hold on, I have to minimize this because otherwise, so, okay. Okay, good. So, welcome everybody to my talk on miming as if action. This talk explores the relation between miming and as if action in gestures. It refuses to follow McNeil's separation between pantomime and gestural miming, because I believe this separation assumes a cataclysmic break rather than showing it. In his famous 1992 book, Hand and Mind, McNeil adapts Kendon's 1988 reflections on lexicalization processes in gestures, how gestures become like words. Why does he do this? McNeil wants to underline his specific interest in spontaneous idiosyncratic co-speech gestures. He considers them forms of imagistic online thought fundamentally different from what he conceives as more language-like gestural forms like pantomime, emblems, and signs within signed languages. Quote from his book: "The focus of this book is on spontaneous and idiosyncratic gestures, but it is useful to begin with the more language-like gestures that constitute sign languages. These are signs organized into true linguistic codes. We benefit in this way from the sharp contrast that we can draw between the spontaneous and the socially regulated kinds of gesture." In doing so, he establishes a cataclysmic break between gesticulation on the one side and pantomime emblems and signs on the other. Why does he do this? Because he assumes them to belong to a linguistic code that goes along with a different form of thinking, linguistic thought. And the core of his theory is that there is a dialectics between two fundamentally different forms of thought, one imagistic, this is what gesticulation does, and another one that is linguistic, this is what vocal language and conventionalized gestures belong to. The dialectic between the two forms of thought is what pushes thinking forward. So the cataclysmic break between gesticulation or spontaneous idiosyncratic gestures and pantomime is part of a theoretical assumption not supported by empirical studies. This idea of a cataclysmic break has been enormously influential in gesture studies, and for example, Golden Meadows' work on silent gestures is direct take-up of this idea. I take a different position here. I suggest moving beyond the idea of a cataclysmic break and instead conceive of relations between gesture and sign as dynamic. This shift involves a definition of the term gesture according to degrees of conventionalization or stabilization. And against this backdrop, we distinguish singular, recurrent, and emblematic gestures from signs. This shift involves furthermore the consideration of gesture-sign relations from two different perspectives. One, the historical evolutionary dynamics of gesture change, and a comparative view of two multimodal languages in contact. So for example, German Sign Language and spoken German, both of which I consider as multimodal. This shift also goes along with the plea concerning the use of the term pantomime. I would like to suggest that for students of gesture, the term pantomime understood as a form of gesticulation used to replace vocal language, as does Golden Meadows' term silent gestures, that the term pantomime should be used and understood against a tradition that goes back to the birth of theater in classical times. In this tradition, the term pantomime has decisive use as a specific artistic practice, as Dominique Boutet has pointed out so convincingly in his 2010 paper. Dominique was an exceptional scholar of gesture and sign who sadly passed away from COVID last spring, and I would like to commemorate him with this talk today. Dominique argues that pantomime as a form of theater has remained a specific artistic practice, a highly elaborate art form up until today and beyond the famous pantomime Marcel Marceau that you see in this picture. I believe that taking this art form and its 2,000-year-long history into consideration may help to sharpen the term pantomime in gesture studies. In classical times, pantomime was conceived as a highly elaborate art form. Mimesis, on the other hand, was conceived as an ordinary human practice, an anthropological faculty, according to Aristotle, that grounds different artistic forms. In this talk, I will argue that gestural mimesis includes as-if actions that allow to explain the transition from manipulative to communicative actions of the hands, or from doing things with our hands to thinking and acting by hand. Now, what is so special about the mode of as-if? Instead of performing the action of opening a window, speakers act as if their hands opened a window. The window handle is an imagined handle. The hand shape and the movement mime the actual action. Instead of performing the action, for instance, of showing some object on the open hand, speakers act as if some argument was displayed on their open hand. This transformation from object manipulation to acting as if and upon virtual objects characterizes depictive as well as pragmatic gestures, and it makes them suitable forms to communicate in the absence of things, actions, and events being talked about. There's one remarkable process involved, and you mentioned that in your talk. I call this modulation of the movement. So miming is not a simple mirroring. Miming includes transformation of the movement. And you are probably familiar with Gregory Bateson's work. He has pointed out that for apes to distinguish play from fight, they modulate their behavior. So, attempting to reconstruct which as-if action is performed with a given gesture offers a path not only to the semiotic grounding of the gesture, but to an experiential base of the intersubjectivity of embodied understanding. This is what I will try to illustrate further in my talk. First, I'll sketch out the theoretical frame against which I consider miming as-if action. Second, I will suggest that mimesis grounds the meaning not only of concrete depictive, but also of abstract depictive and pragmatic gestures. Third, I will briefly outline the methods of gesture analysis that respond to these theoretical claims. I believe that a consideration of gestural miming must take into account that gestures are body movements that unfold in time and that always go along with a certain expressive quality. The theoretical frame against which I consider miming as-if action starts from the idea of gestures as temporal forms, as body movements that unfold in time. This nature of gesture has important theoretical implications for how gestures are understood, and accordingly for how they mean. To account for this, three fundamental aspects of gestures as temporal forms are briefly introduced. Camden's notion of gestures as unfolding in gesture phrases and the relation of gesture segmentation and gestural meaning. Plessner's notion of expressive movement as movement images, and Aristotle's mimesis as anthropological constant. We begin with Camden's concept of gesture phrases, gesture segmentation, and gesture meaning. Adam Camden proposes a linear segmentation of the gestural movement, which distinguishes three core phases: preparation, stroke, and recovery. This segmentation has been a basic premise of qualitative as well as quantitative research on gesture. Notably, Camden establishes the gesture phrase, so preparation and stroke, as basic linear form of a gestural movement. Camden bases his definition of the gesture stroke as the meaningful part of the gesture phrase on Laban movement analysis. Quote, "The phase of the movement excursion closest to its apex is usually recognized as the phase when the expression of the gesture, whatever it may be, is accomplished. It is the phase of the excursion in which the movement dynamics of effort and shape are manifested with greatest clarity. This phase is called the stroke." Camden's connection of expression and meaning leads us to an academic discourse that offers interesting reflections on how gestures become meaningful expressions and how they are understood. Laban's reflections and practices of dance as expression that Camden refers to are an outcome of a widely led intellectual debate on expressive movement as a social, anthropological, aesthetic, linguistic, semiotic trait of human behavior carried out in the late 19th and early 20th century. The idea of body movements as expressive offers an alternative to the idea of expression as an involuntary outer index of a subject's inner disposition. Prominent participants in this debate are Karl Bühler, Wilhelm Wundt, or Helmut Plessner. In Plessner's philosophical anthropology, Expressive movements are not goal-oriented actions or expressions of inner states of an individual, but a form of behavior that synchronizes an organism with its environment. This synchronization is an affective attunement between different bodies, and it is characterized by a certain wholeness, a movement gestalt, a movement image. Plessner illustrates this idea with reference to the movement pattern of a happily barking and jumping dog, but also considers affectless movement forms such as walking, flying, or swimming as wholenesses that form movement images. Here's the quote. These wholenesses belong to the organism through its relation to the environment, its morphology, its specific instincts as motor categories. As a result, the movement shapes are pictorial, even stretched out over a certain duration of time, are co-present with the observer. Grasping, fleeing, repelling, seeking, but also the affectless forms such as walking, flying, swimming, represent such movement images. In their temporal unfolding, expressive movements are thus movements of immediately perceived and felt sensations. An example of a common form of a gestural movement image is done by German Chancellor Angela Merkel while giving a speech in the German Bundestag.
Und Sie haben keine Antwort auf die Frage, was man denn tut, um die immer steigenden Lohnzusatzkosten zu vermeiden.
Merkel performs a small but temporally extended gesture that she uses to cautiously outline a succession of rising stairs. It accompanies part of the following utterance. And you have no answer to the question what to do to stop the rising social costs of salaries. The figure shows the placement of the gesture in relation to the verbal part of the utterance. Chancellor Merkel forms her hand in a precision grip as if grasping a tiny object and moves it stepwise upwards with careful, cautious movement dynamics, highlighting each step with a rhythmical beat. The sketch of the gesture's movement path illustrates how an ephemeral staircase emerges in the perception of the audience. The sketching movement of the hands alone does not make the staircase. It only depicts a rising series of little curves. The image of a staircase only emerges in the embodied perception of the audience as a movement image or a time image. To conclude, the historical concept of expressive movement not only details which parts of the gestural movement figurations are meaningful, the gesture stroke, but also offers a theoretical frame as to how gestures are understood. Put differently, the meaning of gestures is grounded in an intercorporeal understanding of movement images, in immediately perceived and felt sensations. The third fundamental aspect of the theoretical frame against which I consider miming as if action is a systematics of gestural mimesis that some of you are familiar with, that is inspired by the Aristotelian account of mimesis. Aristotle formulates three general conditions of mimesis: means, objects, and modes. As means of gestural mimesis, we distinguish different forms of body movements or different bodily articulators and their manifold interplays. Objects of gestural mimesis are actions, shapes, objects, and events. In depictive gestures, the hands are used to depict concrete and abstract actions, shapes, objects, and events. In pragmatic gestures, the hands enact practical actions to perform concrete communicative ones. Here is an example for a concrete object of gestural mimesis. Former US President Barack Obama uses a gestural enactment of brushing one's teeth when he describes his first night in the White House in an interview in a German late-night show.
The first night that you sleep in the White House.
Yeah.
Because you brush your teeth, you.
Here is an example for a gestural depiction of an abstract kind of action. Obama makes a boxing movement when he describes that part of the story of America that is a kind of a battle between different political positions.
Part of the story of America is this battle between those who want to include more people in this idea of we the people. Part of
gestures that are used to depict something abstract are quite similar to concrete depictives in that they often enact some practical action, describe the shape, or become a model of an object or an event. The difference is that the gesturally depicted actions, objects, or events are abstract ones. The case of a pragmatic object of gestural mimesis is the precision grip gesture. Obama uses many versions of the precision grip gesture in a typical fashion of political speakers. The one he's using in this example highlights the precise point he wants to make, namely sleeping in the White House for the first time is what he experienced as a significant moment when moving into the White House. The moving itself was done by other people. The object of gestural mimesis is the action of as if grasping something very detailed and specific to perform a metacommunicative act.
The first night that you sleep in the White House.
Yeah.
Because you brush your teeth, you.
The precision grip gesture, the bringing together of finger and thumb as if to pick up a crumb, is an example of a very widespread pragmatic gesture. It expresses the preciseness of an argument by transferring the meaning of the practical action to a communicative one. And it is the ethologist Desmond Morris who has suggested this etymology and the term precision grip. The precision grip or the precision ring is known as a gesture of public orators since Quintilian's rhetoric. Now, the modes of gestural mimesis, they answer the question of how gestural mimesis is achieved. The hand acts as if performing an everyday action, acting as if pulling a gear shift. The hands act as if molding some shape, the round shape of a picture frame. The hands act as if drawing some shape or line, the oval shape of a frame. And the hands act as if they were a model of some object. A flat hand represents a piece of paper for taking notes, sometimes also called body part as object. Now, when revisiting the Obama examples, we see that the mimetic mode acting as if grounds all three different types of gestures introduced. Pragmatic gestures, acting as if holding a tiny object. Concrete depictive, acting as if holding a toothbrush, and also in the abstract depicting, acting as if boxing to depict a political battle. Concerning the mimetic means, we see a one-handed pragmatic hand gesture, a one-handed concrete depictive hand gesture that involves a slight head tilt, and a both-handed abstract depictive hand gesture that involves a little engagement of the torso and the head. Now, summary part one. The meaning of a gesture is connected with its linear unfolding in time. Second, as expressive movements, gestures become movement images in the process of embodied understanding. Third, gestures are mimetic expressive movement. They rest upon the human capacity for mimesis. Part two, how miming as if action grounds gestural meaning dynamically. In the second part of my talk, we will take a closer look at how miming as if action grounds gestural meaning. And we will reconsider the three kinds of gestures just mentioned, concrete and abstract depictive gestures and pragmatic ones. However, this time we're going to take a closer look at how they are embedded in longer sequences of talk and gesture, and focus on how easily they change and vary along the dynamics of a conversation and also across time. This example comes from a conversation between a German speaker, Paul, and a Spanish speaker, Luis. The names have been changed. Recorded in Berlin in the early 1990s, the conversation took place at a coffee table in a private apartment and was carried out in Spanish. Luis' contribution to the discussion of Spanish politics is a family story that took place in 1980. A wood-carved portrait of the Spanish king Juan Carlos hung on the wall in the apartment of Luis' parents when his family lived in Venezuelan exile. The plot of the story is that this wooden portrait of the king fell off the wall all by itself a few days before a coup d'etat in Spain, as if foretelling the troubling event. I think knowing this, you can already suspect, based on your capacity for mimesis as if action, what Luis' gestures depict. With his first gesture, G1, Luis loosely forms a roundish shape with a molding movement of his two hands. The round shape is vertically oriented and located in the center of the speaker's gesture space. After a while, the speaker performs G2, positioned in the same location of the gesture space as G1 and also oriented vertically. It is thus spatially connected with G1. It differs from G1 in that it sketches an oval shape with a repeated outlining movement of the index fingers. A one-handed gesture, G3, immediately follows G2. G3 stays within the same place in the center of the gesture space and acts as if holding and placing a small object on top of the just outlined round object. G2 and G3 are thus connected spatially and temporally. A moment later in the storytelling, G4 follows. It differs from the first three gestures in that it is located at the left-hand side of the gesture space, and instead of molding or outlining a shape, something is represented by a flat left hand held high up. Yet G4 still connects with the molding and outlining gestures, G1 and G2, through the vertical orientation of the shape. G5 is then a quick downward movement of the loosely extended right hand, once again located in the center of the gesture space. Now let's consider how these mimetic forms are embedded in the flow of this little story told in a conversation. First, the round shape gesture G1 occurs with a search for an appropriate term for the rather unusual portrait of the king. It accompanies the attribute of an unspoken noun, a small, un pequeño, and continues through a speech pause. With this placement, the gesture is likely to depict the topic of the story, namely some kind of round object. What then follows is a verbal description of the object in question, a picture of the Spanish king, Juan Carlos. Only in line 7, the next gestures, G2 and G3, follow, namely when a detailed description of the topic of the story is given. With a round frame, G2's outlining of an oval shape and a small crown on top, G3's holding and placing gesture. Because of their temporal synchronization with this verbal description, the oval shape G2 comes to depict the picture frame, and G3 is seen as placing an imagined crown on top of the ephemeral frame. In line 9, finally, the storytelling moves on towards the plot. Here, the speaker enacts the spatial setting of the story. While the family was in the dining room, the wooden portrait was hanging in the living room. She had it there in the other room. G4 is temporally coordinated with the deictic there, and only because of this temporal synchronization can the flat hand held up at the upper edge of the gesture space be seen as a representation of the wooden portrait of the king hanging in another room. The story ends with G5, a downward movement that is coordinated with fell down and thus depicts how the portrait fell down from the wall. I have to skip this video because since this talk is being recorded, I don't have the rights to show that to a larger audience, so sorry for that. I can do that in the discussion later on if you want. What we have seen in this example is a thinking by hand that is mimetic and that is happening easily along with the flow of a conversation. The example also illustrates how ready we are in understanding the gestures in terms of the as-if actions they perform. In short, we have seen here a transfer from practical actions to concrete ones through as-if actions. Now let's move on and revisit the Obama interview. Here's the battle video once more. This is available on YouTube, so I can show it to you here.
You know, part of the story of America is this battle between those who want to include more people in this idea of we the people and broaden our democracy and broaden our economy to give opportunity to all people.
Obama describes his vision of an inclusive idea of America in an elaborate multimodal performance. It begins with a loose palm-up open hand, followed by a boxing movement that Obama makes when he describes the story of America as being in part a kind of a battle. As he goes on, Obama uses further abstract depictive gestures to illustrate the two contrasting positions clashing in this battle. So when speaking of including more people, he moves his bent arms and hands together and shapes a big circle, almost as if embracing as much space as possible. With this movement, the abstract action of including people is gesturally depicted, and this depiction is based on a mimetic as-if action. He acts as if he would embrace something or someone. This inclusive gesture is followed by the outlining of a sphere, a gestural depiction of the abstract concept of idea, and done with the as-if drawing mode of gestural mimesis. After that, he returns to a smaller version of the embracing gesture, specifying this idea as the inclusive notion of we the people. So if you want, you see here already in this sequence a reduction of form. The example shows how commonplace abstract objects of gestural miming are, and that mimetic as-if actions are highly productive in co-speech gestures, no matter whether abstract or concrete. In a nutshell, we see here a transfer from practical actions to gestures of the abstract through as-if actions. This is thinking by hand about politics based on doing mimesis. Now, let's move on to the last example, the pragmatic precision grip gesture. I already said that the precision grip gesture is a very nice example of a recurrently used pragmatic gesture that mimes a practical action. Note, however, that the precision grip is used as a recurrent gesture and as an emblem, and actually also as a singular gesture in the case of the Angela Merkel example that I've just shown you. We have seen above that in this gesture, and the precision grip, index and thumb are brought together as if to pick up a crumb. The gesture expresses the preciseness of an argument by transferring the meaning of the practical action to a communicative action. I already said that. Using the precision grip, Obama acts as he would perform a practical action with an imaginary object. The actual grasping of a tiny object is transferred to the communicative action of making a precise statement.
The first night that you sleep in the White House.
Yeah.
Notably, when gestures undergo processes of stabilization, hybrid and fully stabilized forms emerge and may even coexist. The precision grip as a rhetorical gesture is a case of a hybrid form. While the hand shape shows a stable core, the finger-thumb grasp, all other kinetic aspects are variable. This is different for the ring gesture as an expression of excellence and perfection. In this gesture, all kinesic aspects are stabilized. Hand shape, finger and thumb form a ring. Precision grip. The movement is accentuated and then held in a post-stroke hold. The orientation is palm vertical away from body, not possible like this. The position in the gesture space is center upper periphery. It's not possible here. A change of any one of those aspects would include a loss of the meaning of excellence and perfection. So the ring gesture as expression of perfection and excellence is a classical example of an emblematic gesture, a gesture word if you want, a fully lexicalized gestural form. The case of the pragmatic precision grip, and I should add Angela Merkel here, I'm sorry I didn't do that. The case of the pragmatic precision grip gestures shows how pragmatic meaning emerges by transferring the meaning of the practical action to a communicative one. The case of recurrent and emblematic gestures allows us to study the role of mimesis in historical processes of stabilization and conventionalization. Given the time limits of this talk, I cannot dig deeper here, but I'll be happy to answer any questions in the discussion, or you can double check in my papers on gesture and sign in the Frontier special issue on visual language and the one on recurrent gestures published in Gesture Studies. Now, part 3, miming as if action in the context of gesture analysis. A toolbox of methods for gesture analysis refers to a chapter that spells out the methods for gesture analysis that I've developed with my team over the past decades. It will appear in Jenke's Cambridge Handbook of Gesture Studies. We distinguish micro and macro level analyses. Some kind of micro level analysis is mandatory for any kind of gesture analysis. Macro level analysis mirrors specific research foci. The arrows show which tools we have applied in the examples presented today. So we did micro level analysis and we looked at the unfolding along discourse and interaction. We looked at gesture dynamics on 2 levels, unfolding along discourse and interaction, and with regard to historical change. This figure zooms in on the micro level analysis of the gestural form and shows that the analysis of miming as if action is only one potential aspect a gesture analysis might consider. Which one is relevant depends on your research focus. Once again, the arrows show which microanalytic tools we have applied in the analysis documented today. So we have looked at depictive and pragmatic gestures. We have looked at hands as if actions, and we have considered in the historical part, concerning the historical changes, we've looked at aspects of kinesic form. So much for a glance on the place of miming and as if actions in the context of analyzing the meaning of gestures. Let me summarize. In part one, gestures as mimetic expressive movements has introduced a theoretical framework for miming as if action that grounds meaning and enables intersubjectivity. Kendon's notion of gesture phrases and the connection between gesture segmentation and meaning. Plessner's concept of expressive movements as movement images and Aristotle's account of mimesis as anthropological constant as a base for a systematics of gestural mimesis. In part two, we have considered how miming grounds meaning of concrete, abstract, and pragmatic gestures dynamically. We have shown how dynamics in the flow of conversations, in the flowing here and now of different discourse types, and we have touched upon historical processes of stabilization. And part three has offered a glance, really only a glance, on the toolbox of methods for gesture analysis on which the analysis presented in this talk are based. Let me come to a brief conclusion. Miming from the point of view of gesture studies is grounded in as-if actions that allow to explain the transition from manipulative to communicative actions of the hands, or from doing things with our hands to thinking and acting by hand. Here are some references, and I want to thank my collaborators, especially Matthias Rohler for the drawings, Silva Ladewig and Jana Brochesem for many years of collaboration, and my current students, Jana Junge, Clara Kindler, and Katarina Papadopoulou. And I want to thank you for your attention. Thank you. I can bring up the presentation again when it's necessary, but I think it's nicer to, to have, for me, it's at least nicer to see more of these names here. Like this, I don't have the feeling that I speak into the dark. Now I see Jordan. Jordan, hello. Yes, I can hear you too. Okay. No problem.
Okay. Thank you very much, Cornelia. Great to see you and to hear some of the latest versions of your approach. A very quick question while I'm thinking for something smarter to say later. The as-if notion, right? It rings two bells that are closely related but not synonymous. One is pretense, that we have been discussing, is the other, and the other is sign, in the semiotic sense, right? So would you, translate it as one or the other or both? Gestures as signs that is standing for something beyond themselves, or do you want to put something third in your notion of as-ifness?
I think the as-if is so important because it sets up this immediate link with the action, and in that sense, I would say it has something of pretending as if I would do something, but it's already a semiotic process. And I think this is, in my very, very early work on pragmatic gestures many years ago, I came across this work of Gregory Bates that I only mentioned here very in passing. And you all know much more about non-human primate communication. I know a little bit, but you all know much, much more than me. But one thing that struck me, and I think that is what I see in gesture happening all the time, and that's, I think, where we can see, in a sense, language evolution in co-speech gesturing all the time, and in these processes of of deconstructing a unit into more reduced forms. You can see that basically this process of as-if action as a link between the action and a fully fledged linguistic sign, be it gestural or let's say, be it gestural or sign in a sign language. So to make a long come back to the sign question, I think what is important here is the modulation of the action. Pretense is just, let's say, the kind of a psychological condition or so, but what I find extremely important is that in this modulation of the action that Gregory Bateson describes to distinguish play from fight in chimps, and we have seen in our data actually things like that, where the orangutans, when they you know, the gesture for starting a fight is a slapping gesture like this. But we've even seen in our data that when they do a gesture to perform, to start a playful interaction, you see that. So you have a change it's an as-if action still, it's an as-if action, but you have a significant change in the orientation of the hand, which is what Bateson considers as modulation of the movement. And I think this is for me, this is the first step from action to language. This kind of modulation of the form, and that makes it a sign. And so it's more than pretending. I'm okay. It's a kind of pretense in terms of the psychological aspect of it, but the crucial thing, I think, is that we see a form emerging here that has certain characteristics, and the as-if is for me the link between the action and the emerging linguistic sign, so to say.
Right. Thank you. This is, I think, how I also understood it, and I think your climb from individual gestures towards sign kind of resembles what we were discussing here. I don't know if you were here, between more pantomimic and less pantomimic gestures, right?
I was here this morning. You know, I listened to Przemek's and Sławek's talk, and I saw many parallels. You know, in the way you were looking at this process of this climb from pantomimic to more and less pantomimic. I mean, set apart the term, but I think we're talking about the same process here. Yes. And the point why I decided to show you these examples today was that I thought we hardly take the time to really look very carefully at the co-speech gestural forms. And we can learn a lot from a close analysis of co-speech gesturing about this process. Yeah, and so that was my idea for a contribution today to this. Welcome.
Hello, Cornelia, and thank you for that lovely talk. It's Paula Marintet.
Oh, hi.
I think you can't really see us, but
no, I see you. I see
okay.
You, Paula. That's great.
I'm wondering if you could go back to your start with McNeill and this cataclysmic break between co-speech gesture and pantomime.
Yes.
So what we looked at were co-speech gesture, but what we are discussing here is pantomime, and one of the key characteristics that's often attributed to pantomime is the lack of speech. So I'm wondering if you could reflect on how you think the presence of speech, or if you think the presence of speech makes a difference, as McNeill believes it strongly that it does.
Yeah, I know. Thank you. This is a wonderful question, Paula. Thank you. Well, first of all, I believe that when you do gesture analysis, I don't I completely disagree with McNeill that a pantomime only happens in the absence of speech. When you look at how people talk together, and I've shown you the example, and there are even deictic pronouns that integrate gestures into the speech flow. So there is a speech pause, and then you have the gesture, you know, it had a shape like this. He doesn't describe the shape, he makes the shape. So I don't really see a difference here. When it comes to the idea, to the nature of gestures as miming movements. Well, I'll go back to this quickly to this overview. And I've taken up this discussion because here you see it again. McNeill makes an artificial establishes an artificial distinction between gesticulation on the left-hand side and pantomime on the right-hand side. Okay. Can you? I have to, of course, I have to share the screen. Okay, I'm sorry. This is too much tech stuff going on here. Okay, here is it. Okay, so now you should see it, right? Do you see it? Okay, so what McNeill does, he puts gesticulation apart from what he calls language-like forms of gesture use. But what he gives us on the right-hand side, pantomime, emblems, and sign language are claimed to operate independent from spoken language. Now, when we look at spoken language, we have everything in there too. We have pantomimic elements, we have emblems that are co-speech, and we don't have signs. Okay, that's a different story. So that's why I suggest this. And you see, I've listed here the points that McNeill makes when he says gesticulation. There's an obligatory presence of speech, and pantomime there is an obligatory absence of speech, and emblems optional presence, and sign language obligatory absence of speech. So I think this is a claim that has been, he has claimed that many years ago, and people have challenged him on that. But the point I want to make is that this break is motivated by his theoretical interest in idiosyncratic, spontaneous co-speech gestures, and he because he sets up this difference between linguistic thought and imagistic thought, and here is where I don't agree. I see that there is I would claim there is a decline from singular gestures which are not conventionalized and which show no compositionality and which have a highly variable relation of form and meaning, to recurrent gestures like the precision grip, which are partially conventionalized and where we observe an emergent compositionality, because we have what we see here is a stabilization of a form-meaning core, as I've shown you in the Obama precision grip gesture. And then we also have, in parallel to spoken language, emblems that are fully conventionalized and that show no compositionality. So the ring gesture as an expression of perfect, excellent. So here we have a completely fixed form meaning unit. And so this is basically the point that I wanted to make. So thank you, Paula, for bringing this up again. Thank you for that.
Thank you for saying this. I completely agree with you about McNeil's approach.
Thank you. I mean, the term cataclysmic break, for those who are not familiar with that kind of literature, has been is a title of a paper, a co-authored paper by Susan Golden Meadow, David McNeil, and a third author that I don't recall right now.
Hello, Cornelia.
Hi, good to see you.
Hi, great to see you. Thank you for your talk, and kind of to follow up on the independence of pantomime and language. Now with Jordan, we've been sort of having a look at the material collected by Jerome Lewis in Bayaka hunter-gatherers, and particularly hunting stories, and they show very well how pantomime is integrated into them. So particularly the more dramatic elements of pantomime, also they make use of a lot of non-linguistic vocalization. So, and this is a non-weird culture. This is the point that Sławek was making. So perhaps the idea of separation also reflects the cultural processes,
Yes,
rather than how pantomime could have been used, or what was the natural use of pantomime for human beings. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Absolutely, I agree. Absolutely, because I think we have nobody speaks about the role of writing in the process of separating the spoken and the spoken embodied word from the vocal. Yeah. So that language become disembodied has a lot to do with the establishment of, with the invention of writing and printing.